A lioness is crouched low in the tall grass, completely still, every muscle locked in position. 30 feet away, a baby wildebeest stumbles alone through the open field, separated from its herd, wobbling on legs that haven't figured out how to work yet. This is, by every possible measure, the easiest meal she will encounter all week. No mother standing guard, no herd to trample her, just one clumsy, defenseless calf, and one of the most efficient predators on the planet. Imagine Leoa recuando lentamente, virando-se e indo embora, and then she doesn't move. She watches for a long moment, and then she simply turns around and walks away. Imagine, caçador humano, floresta, arma abaixada, olhando para filhote de cervo thousands of miles away. In a completely different setting, a hunter has a young deer in his sights. His finger is on the trigger. He's been tracking for hours. And at the last second, he lowers the rifle and lets it go. Imagem, logo do canal, mão botão de inscrever-se animado. Before we get into why this happens, hit subscribe if you like uncovering the hidden logic behind animal behavior, because this one goes somewhere you probably don't expect. Imagem, divisão de tela, predador de lado, filhote do outro, com ponto de interrogação entre os dois. So here's the question that should be bothering you right now. Predators exist because evolution rewards efficiency. Maximum calories, minimum risk, minimum energy spent. And a baby animal is, on paper, the single best deal in the entire food chain. It can't run fast. It can't fight back. It doesn't even fully understand that it's in danger. If nature really only rewarded ruthless efficiency, predators should be lining up for easy meals like this every single day. Imagem, leão, urso humano pré-histórico em silhueta lado a lado. And yet, across an enormous range of predator species, including our own ancestors, something keeps getting in the way. Some kind of switch flips, and an animal that has every biological reason to attack simply doesn't. This isn't a one-off. It's not a fluke caught on a lucky camera trap. It's a pattern. And once you start pulling on it, it turns out predators sparing the young isn't some sentimental exception to nature's rules. It's actually built into the rules themselves. Imagem savana africana, entardecer. Uma leoa parada imóvel olhando fixamente. A lioness is crouched low in the tall grass, completely still, every muscle locked in position. 30 feet away, a baby wildebeest stumbles alone through the open field, separated from its herd, wobbling on legs that haven't figured out how to work yet. This is, by every possible measure, the easiest meal she will encounter all week. No mother standing guard, no herd to trample her, just one clumsy, defenseless calf and one of the most efficient predators on the planet, and then she doesn't move. She watches for a long moment, and then she simply turns around and walks away. Thousands of miles away, in a completely different setting, a hunter has a young deer in his sights. His finger is on the trigger. He's been tracking for hours. And at the last second, he lowers the rifle and lets it go. Before we get into why this happens, hit subscribe if you like uncovering the hidden logic behind animal behavior, because this one goes somewhere you probably don't expect. So here's the question that should be bothering you right now. Predators exist because evolution rewards efficiency. Maximum calories, minimum risk, minimum energy spent. And a baby animal is, on paper, the single best deal in the entire food chain. It can't run fast. It can't fight back. It doesn't even fully understand that it's in danger. If nature really only rewarded ruthless efficiency, predators should be lining up for easy meals like this every single day. And yet, across an enormous range of predator species, including our own ancestors, something keeps getting in the way. Some kind of switch flips, and an animal that has every biological reason to attack simply doesn't. This isn't a one-off. It's not a fluke caught on a lucky camera trap. It's a pattern. And once you start pulling on it, it turns out predators sparing the young isn't some sentimental exception to nature's rules. It's actually built into the rules themselves. Let's start with the visual trigger, because this is where things get genuinely strange. Big eyes relative to head size. A rounded, oversized skull. Short, clumsy limbs. Uncoordinated movement. Biologists call this cluster of features the baby schema, and it wasn't originally studied in humans at all. It was first described by Konrad Lorenz back in the 1940s as a set of physical cues that trigger caretaking instincts across a wide range of species, not just the one producing the baby. Here's the part that should surprise you. This isn't a soft, sentimental reaction limited to cuddly animals. Researchers studying predator behavior have found that the same visual cues that make a human, say a puppy is cute, appear to trigger a measurable hesitation response in actual predators encountering the young of other species. A calf's proportions, a fawn's stumbling gait, a chick's oversized head relative to its body, these aren't just adorable to us. They appear to function as a kind of universal biological stop sign, one that evolved long before humans existed to appreciate cuteness in the first place. Now let's talk about why evolution would ever favor an animal that hesitates instead of attacks, because at first glance, this looks like it should get selected out of existence. A predator that skips easy meals should, in theory, lose out to predators that don't, except the math changes the moment you account for what usually happens right before and right after a baby animal shows up unattended. Young animals rarely travel completely alone. A mother is almost always close by, and a mother defending her offspring becomes a completely different threat profile than the same animal in any other context. Wildlife researchers tracking lion prides in the Serengeti have repeatedly documented adult lionesses sustaining serious, sometimes fatal injury specifically while defending calves from other predators, injuries far more severe than those typically recorded in adult-on-adult confrontations. A meal that comes with a high probability of a violent, motivated defender attached to it stops looking like an easy meal and starts looking like a liability. There's also a longer-term calculation buried in here that's easy to miss. A predator operating in a stable territory doesn't just care about today's meal. It depends on that ecosystem still producing prey next year and the year after that. Killing off the next generation of your primary food source is a short-term win and a long-term disaster. And there's growing evidence that predator populations in stable, low-competition territories show measurably lower rates of juvenile prey killing compared to populations under food stress or high competition. This isn't the predator making a conscious conservation decision. It's closer to an evolved bias that happened to produce sustainable behavior because predator lineages that wiped out their own future food supply simply didn't stick around long enough to pass that tendency on. Field researchers have documented this pattern with striking specificity. Wildlife biologist George Schaller, in his long-term studies of lion behavior in the Serengeti, recorded numerous instances of adult lions encountering unattended young of other species, wildebeest calves, zebra foals, and repeatedly noted hesitation and disengagement rather than immediate pursuit, particularly in prides that were not actively food-stressed. Separately, rangers working in African elephant conservation zones have documented cases of predators, including hyenas and even leopards, approaching orphaned or separated elephant calves and retreating without engaging, likely due to the near certainty that an adult elephant, famous for both memory and aggression toward threats to calves, would be somewhere nearby. The pattern holds up across completely different ecosystems, different predator species, and different research teams, which is exactly what you'd expect if this is a real biological mechanism and not just a handful of coincidences stitched together into a nice story. Now let's bring this closer to home, because humans are predators too, and hunting cultures across history show this exact same switch flipping. Ask any experienced deer hunter, and you'll hear some version of the same story. A young animal steps into range, clearly a fawn, clearly alone, and the shot simply doesn't happen. Hunters describe it less as a rule they were taught, and more as something that happens before conscious thought even kicks in, a hesitation that shows up in the body before it shows up in the mind. Wildlife management agencies have leaned on this instinct heavily enough to build entire legal frameworks around it. Hunting regulations across most of North America explicitly restrict or forbid the killing of visibly young deer, elk, and other game animals, not purely for population management reasons, but because the behavior they're regulating against is rare enough among hunters in the first place that the law is mostly formalizing an instinct that already exists. This shows up in far older contexts too. Indigenous hunting traditions across multiple continents, from certain Inuit hunting practices to traditional East African pastoralist communities, include long-documented customs specifically discouraging or outright forbidding the killing of visibly young animals, even in situations of active food scarcity. Anthropologists studying these traditions have suggested this isn't purely cultural invention. It looks a lot like formalized versions of an instinct that likely predates culture entirely, one that early human hunter-gatherers would have carried with them long before anyone wrote a single hunting law down. But here's where we need to slow down and be honest, because this pattern is absolutely not universal, and pretending otherwise would be selling you a nicer story than the one nature actually tells. Infanticide is real, well-documented, and disturbingly common in specific contexts. Male lions taking over a new pride will frequently kill existing cubs that aren't their own. A behavior primatologists and wildlife biologists have confirmed serves a direct reproductive purpose. It brings females back into fertility faster, so the new male can father his own offspring sooner. This isn't rare or accidental, It's one of the most consistently documented behaviors in lion social structure, and it directly contradicts any version of this story that tries to paint predators as instinctively gentle toward all young animals. Desperation changes the calculation entirely too. Predator populations under serious food stress, drought years, habitat loss, collapsed prey populations show measurably higher rates of juvenile prey killing across multiple studied species. The hesitation response isn't some fixed moral law wired into predator brains. It's a behavior that only reliably shows up under specific conditions, enough food security that an easy meal isn't worth the long-term risk, and enough time for that evolved bias to actually develop in the first place. Strip away either of those conditions, and the sparing behavior tends to disappear right along with them. So what does all of this actually add up to? It's tempting to walk away from this thinking nature has some kind of built-in moral code, a quiet rule written into every predator's brain that says, spare the young. But that's not quite what's happening here, and the honest version of this story is actually more interesting than the comforting one. This isn't morality. It's risk math. A hesitation that evolved because under the right conditions, full bellies, low competition, a defender nearby attacking a baby simply costs more than it pays out. Change those conditions, remove the food security, remove the time for that bias to take hold, and the hesitation vanishes, replaced by exactly the kind of behavior we just described in lions taking over a new pride. What looks like mercy from a distance is really a cost-benefit calculation that happened to produce something that resembles mercy. Often enough, and often enough is exactly why we've been able to document it across so many completely unrelated species. Quick pause. If this is messing with how you think about predators, hit like and drop a comment telling me which part surprised you most. It genuinely helps this video reach more people who'd find this as interesting as you clearly do. Now here's the piece that ties this all the way back to us. Early human hunters lived under exactly the same pressures that produced this behavior in every other predator on this list. Food security that came and went with the seasons. Small, tightly connected groups where killing off the next generation of a shared food source was a threat to everyone's future, not just an abstract concern. And somewhere in that environment, long before any written law, any religious text, any formal moral code existed, something like a hesitation toward the young of other species almost certainly took root. Not because early humans were especially gentle, because the ones who developed that hesitation left behind ecosystems and descendants that the ones without it didn't. That's a genuinely strange thing to sit with. The idea of protecting a child, an idea that eventually gets written into religion, law, culture, and instinct alike, might not have started as a moral invention at all. It might have started as exactly the same quiet, unconscious risk calculation running in a lioness watching a wildebeest calf wobble across an open field. Long before anyone called it innocence, and long before anyone called it wrong to harm a child, something in a predator's brain had already run the numbers and decided the smarter move was to walk away. If you enjoyed connecting these dots, hit like, leave a comment with your take, and check out the video on your screen right now. It picks up a piece of this exact same story from a